A mafia boss left $10,000 in cash on his desk and pretended to sleep, testing if his maid's 8-year-old son would steal it. The boy approached the money, reached out his hand, but instead of grabbing the cash, he did something that froze the most feared man in the city. Fred heard rubber sliding, felt something warm settle over his arms. The child was covering him with oversized cleaning gloves because even scary old people get sick when they're cold. Wait, before I tell you how far this goes, pause this video. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because if this story already has you hooked, what's coming will wreck you. Comment your country below. Let's make this global. Now let me show you how a terrified 8-year-old with cleaning gloves accidentally destroyed a mafia empire worth millions. Outside the bulletproof windows of his home office, the Sunday morning sun was bright and unforgiving. Inside, the air conditioning hummed aggressively, keeping the room almost uncomfortably cold. Fred had set the trap perfectly. On the polished mahogany desk directly beside his chair, he had placed stacks of cash. $10,000 in crisp $100 bills, bound in bank bands and arranged in neat piles. It was enough money to transform a struggling person's entire year. The bills were spread out deliberately, looking as if they'd been carelessly left by a careless old man counting his weekly collections. Fred waited. He heard the door open quietly. A woman named Lisa entered. Lisa was his newest housekeeper. She had been working in the Shriver home for only 2 weeks. She was in her early 30s, but exhaustion aged her face. Her movements were quick and nervous, like someone who had learned to stay invisible. Lisa was a widow. Fred knew this from the background check his security chief had run. Her husband had been killed in a gang shooting 3 years ago when he'd tried to break up a fight outside their apartment building. He had left her with crushing medical debt and an 8-year-old son named Kenneth. Today was Sunday, and normally Lisa worked alone in the house while Fred handled business elsewhere. But today was different. The elementary school had closed for emergency maintenance after a pipe burst Friday night. Lisa had no family to watch Kenneth. She had no money for childcare. She had called Fred's assistant yesterday, her voice shaking, begging permission to bring her son to work just this once. She had promised he would be silent, invisible, that Fred would never even know he was there. The assistant had granted permission with a warning. If the boy caused any trouble, Lisa would be fired immediately. And in this neighborhood, being fired by Fred Shriver meant more than unemployment. It meant no one else would hire you. It meant you were on your own. Fred heard the soft, careful footsteps of the housekeeper, followed by the lighter, smaller footsteps of a child. "Stay right here, Kenneth," Lisa whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Sit on that chair by the wall. Do not move from that spot. Do not touch anything in this room. Do not make a sound. Mr. Shriver is resting. If you disturb him, Mommy will lose her job and we'll have nowhere to live. Do you understand me, baby?" "Yes, Mama," a small voice answered. Fred, pretending to sleep, registered the tone. The boy's voice wasn't playful or defiant. It sounded obedient and frightened. "I have to go clean the kitchen and the hallways," Lisa whispered urgently. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. Please, Kenneth, just sit there and don't move. Can you do that for Mama?" "I promise," the boy said quietly. Fred heard the door close. Lisa was gone. Now it was just the mafia boss and the child. For a long stretch, there was complete silence. The only sounds were the aggressive hum of the air conditioning and the distant ticking of an antique clock on the bookshelf. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Fred kept his breathing rhythmic and steady, but every sense was heightened. He expected the boy to fidget. He expected to hear the scrape of the chair as Kenneth got up to explore. Children were naturally curious, and poor children, Fred believed, were naturally tempted by wealth they'd never possess. But Kenneth didn't move. 5 full minutes passed. Fred's shoulder was beginning to ache from the position, but he remained perfectly still. He was a patient hunter. Then he heard it, the soft creak of the chair. The boy was standing. Fred's muscles tensed beneath his tailored suit. Here we go, he thought. The little rat is going for the cheese. He heard small, hesitant footsteps crossing the hardwood floor. They were slow, careful. The boy was approaching the desk. Fred knew exactly what Kenneth was seeing. The money. $10,000 in cash, sitting there unguarded, close enough to touch. An 8-year-old boy from the projects would know what money meant. He would know that this cash could buy his mother groceries for months, could pay rent, could change their lives. Fred visualized the scene playing out. The boy would reach out with his small hands, grab as much cash as he could stuff into his pockets, and Fred would snap his eyes open, catch him red-handed, and throw both mother and son out of his house. It would confirm everything Fred believed. Everyone steals. Everyone betrays. Trust is a fool's weakness. The footsteps stopped. The boy was standing right next to the desk, right next to Fred's chair. Fred could sense the child's presence, could almost feel the warmth of a small body nearby. He waited for the telltale rustle of paper, for the sound of cash being grabbed. But the grab never came. Instead, Fred felt something unexpected. He felt a tiny, tentative hand rest gently on his forearm. The touch was feather-light, hesitant. Fred fought every instinct to react. What the hell is this kid doing? He thought. Is he checking to see if I'm really asleep? Is this some kind of setup? The small hand withdrew. Then Fred heard a soft, worried sound, almost like a sigh. "Mister?" Kenneth whispered. The voice was so quiet it was barely louder than breath. Fred didn't respond. He added a faint snore, a low rumbling sound. The boy shifted his weight. Then Fred heard a sound that made no sense. It wasn't the sound of theft. It was the sound of rubber sliding against fabric. The boy was removing something. What is this? Fred's mind raced. Is he taking off his shoes? Is he trying to move more quietly to steal the money? Lisa's hand trembled as she pushed open the heavy oak door to Fred Shriver's private office. The hinges whispered softly, but to her, the sound was deafening. She held Kenneth's small hand tightly, too tightly, her fingers wrapped around his like a vice. "Come," she breathed, barely louder than the hum of the air conditioning. Kenneth followed, his worn sneakers making almost no sound on the hardwood floor. His eyes were wide, taking in the room he'd been warned about his entire 2 weeks living in this nightmare. The office smelled like leather and cigars and something else, something dangerous that Kenneth couldn't name but could feel in his bones. Lisa pulled him close, kneeling down so her face was level with his. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears. "Kenneth, baby, listen to me very carefully." Her voice shook. "Mr. Shriver is sleeping in that chair. You see him?" Kenneth nodded, his gaze flicking to the powerful man reclined behind the massive desk. "You sit right here, in this chair by the wall." She guided him to a simple wooden chair positioned in the corner, far from the desk. "Don't breathe loud. Don't move from that spot. Don't touch anything in this room. Don't even look at him too long. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mama." "If you disturb him." Lisa's voice caught. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Kenneth had heard the neighborhood stories about Fred Shriver. People who angered him didn't just lose jobs. They disappeared. Entire families sometimes. "I promise, Mama. I'll be invisible." Lisa kissed his forehead quickly, desperately. "I have to clean the kitchen and the hallways. 10 minutes, baby. Just 10 minutes. Can you stay absolutely still for 10 minutes? I can do it." The door clicked shut behind Lisa, and Kenneth was alone with the sleeping monster. He pressed his back against the wall, making himself as small as possible. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Kenneth, Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Kenneth was terrified. The office was so cold. His thin jacket wasn't enough. The oversized red cleaning gloves his mother had given him, leftovers from the supply closet, too big for his 8-year-old hands, felt warm against his skin. He gripped them tighter. Behind the desk, Fred Shriver didn't move. His chest rose and fell steadily. He looked almost peaceful, but Kenneth knew better. Monsters didn't stop being monsters just because they were sleeping. Kenneth's eyes drifted to the desk. The money. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills arranged carelessly near the edge. Kenneth had never seen that much cash in his entire life. His breath caught. That money could fix everything. Mama wouldn't have to work until midnight anymore. They could buy food that wasn't expired. They could fix the broken heater in their apartment. His father's voice came again. We're poor, son, but we're not thieves. Never steal. No matter how hungry you are, no matter how desperate. You keep your honor. Kenneth squeezed his eyes shut and wrapped his arms around himself. 5 minutes passed in absolute silence. Kenneth didn't move. He barely breathed. And behind the desk, Fred Shriver waited for a grab that never came. Kenneth's legs were cramping. He'd been sitting perfectly still for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes. He shifted slightly, and the wooden chair creaked beneath him. Then he noticed something. The man in the chair, Mr. Shriver, his arms were resting on the armrests, exposed from where his expensive suit sleeves had ridden up slightly. And his skin. Kenneth squinted in the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains. The man's forearms were covered in goosebumps. Tiny bumps all up and down his skin. He's cold, Kenneth thought. Really cold. Kenneth stood slowly, his heart hammering so hard he was sure it would wake the sleeping man. Each step toward the desk felt like walking through water, slow, deliberate, terrifying. Behind closed eyelids, Fred registered the movement instantly. His entire body went rigid, though he kept his breathing steady. The boy was approaching. Here it comes, Fred thought. His right hand, hidden from view, slid imperceptibly toward the desk drawer where he kept his Glock 19. Not to use on a child, of course, but to have ready. To intimidate. To prove his point when he caught the little thief red-handed. The footsteps stopped beside his chair. Fred waited for small hands to grab the cash. Waited for the inevitable betrayal that would prove, once again, that human nature was rotten to its core. Mister? The voice was barely a whisper, small and worried. It wasn't the voice of a thief checking if the coast was clear. It was the voice of a child genuinely concerned. Fred didn't respond. He added a soft snore of a low rumble in his chest. Then he felt it, a tiny, hesitant hand resting on his forearm. The touch was featherlight, tentative, checking. What the hell is this kid doing? Fred's mind raced. Is he checking if I'm really asleep? Is this some kind of setup? The small hand withdrew. Kenneth bit his lip, studying the powerful man in the chair. The goosebumps were worse up close. The office felt like a freezer. Kenneth looked down at his own hands, at the oversized red rubber gloves that kept his fingers warm while his mama cleaned. He made a decision. The sound of rubber sliding against skin broke the silence. Kenneth carefully removed his cleaning gloves, one finger at a time, trying not to make noise. They were still warm from his hands. Fred's confusion mounted. Is he taking off his shoes? Is he trying to move more quietly to steal the money? Then Kenneth did something that shattered every expectation Fred had constructed in his 40 years of testing human nature. The boy gently draped the oversized red gloves over Fred's exposed forearms, one on each arm, arranging them carefully like makeshift blankets. The rubber was still warm. The gesture was impossibly tender. Kenneth smoothed the gloves into place, making sure they covered the goosebumps. Then he leaned in close and whispered, so softly that Fred almost didn't hear it. "Mama says cold makes old people sick, even the mean ones." Fred's heart stopped. Behind his closed eyelids, something cracked. Something he'd thought was dead and buried beneath decades of violence and betrayal. This child, this poor, frightened, 8-year-old boy wasn't stealing from him. He was protecting him. No, Fred's mind screamed silently. This doesn't happen. People don't do this. Everyone takes. Everyone betrays. This is a trick. It has to be a trick. But the warmth of those rubber gloves on his skin told a different truth. Fred heard Kenneth's small footsteps move toward the desk. Fred thought bitterly, his jaw clenching behind his carefully maintained sleeping expression. Here it comes. The real play. Warm up the old man, distract him with kindness, and now take what you really came for. The fortress of cynicism that had protected Fred's heart for 4 decades began rebuilding itself, brick by brick. He'd almost been fooled. Almost believed that genuine goodness still existed in this rotten world. But everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. The boy was at the desk now. Fred could hear him breathing, could sense his small presence near the stacks of cash. Take it, Fred thought savagely. Go ahead and take it, kid. Prove me right. Prove that your mother raised just another street rat who'll steal the moment no one's watching. But the sound that reached Fred's ears wasn't the rustle of bills being pocketed. It was the soft whisper of paper sliding across polished mahogany. Fred risked the smallest movement, cracked open his left eye just a sliver, barely enough to see through his lashes. Kenneth was carefully pushing the money away from the edge of the desk, moving each stack toward the center where they wouldn't fall. His small fingers handled the cash with extraordinary care, as if each bill was fragile and precious. Money shouldn't fall, Kenneth whispered to himself, his voice carrying the weight of lessons learned through hardship. Mama works too hard for money to fall. Fred watched, frozen in disbelief, as Kenneth noticed something else. On the floor near Fred's foot was a dropped cigar cutter, solid gold, encrusted with small diamonds, worth more than anything Kenneth had ever touched. It must have fallen earlier when Fred had arranged himself in the chair. Kenneth bent down, picked it up with both hands, and wiped it carefully on his thin jacket. He examined it for scratches, turning it gently in the dim light. Then he placed it respectfully on the desk, positioning it away from the edge, safe beside the money. Safe now, the boy murmured. Then Kenneth turned and walked back across the office, his footsteps quiet and careful. He returned to his wooden chair against the wall, exactly where his mother had left him. He sat down, pulled his knees up to his chest, and wrapped his thin arms around himself. Without his gloves, Kenneth was shivering. The aggressive air conditioning cut through his threadbare jacket like it wasn't there. His small body trembled, but he made no complaint. He'd given his only warmth to the sleeping man who terrified him, and now he sat there, guarding his promise. Don't move. Don't make trouble. Be invisible. Fred lay in his chair, his mind in absolute chaos. Why? The question screamed through his consciousness like a bullet ricocheting in his skull. Why didn't he take it? I know they're poor. I know Lisa works herself to exhaustion. I know they live in a roach-infested apartment where the heat doesn't work and the landlord won't fix anything. I know that money could change their lives. So why? The stacks of cash sat untouched. Protected. Made safe by the same small hands that could have stolen them. Fred had spent 40 years building a fortress around his heart. Brick by brick, betrayal by betrayal, body by body, he'd constructed walls so thick that nothing could penetrate them. He'd made himself immune to sentiment, to compassion, to the weakness of trust. But in this moment, feeling the warmth of rubber gloves on his arms, hearing a shivering child whisper about protecting money that wasn't his, Fred felt something he hadn't felt in decades. The fortress cracked. Just slightly. But it cracked. The office door burst open with sudden urgency. Lisa rushed in, breathless and wild-eyed. She'd been cleaning the kitchen when a sick feeling had twisted in her gut, mother's instinct screaming that something was wrong. She'd abandoned the half-scrubbed counters and run back, her heart pounding with primal fear. Her eyes went immediately to the corner. Kenneth was there, sitting in the chair, but something was wrong. He was shivering, his thin arms wrapped around himself, his hands bare. Where were his gloves? Then Lisa's gaze shifted to Fred Shriver. The bright red rubber cleaning gloves were draped over the Mafia boss's arms like obscene decorations. The gloves she'd given Kenneth. The gloves that were now touching one of the most dangerous men in the city. No. No, no, no. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that would have been a scream. Her eyes darted to the desk. The money, the stacks of cash that had been positioned near the edge, were moved. Rearranged. Kenneth had touched them. Kenneth had touched everything. The world tilted beneath her feet. He touched him. My baby touched Fred Shriver. He moved his things. He put his dirty cleaning gloves on a man who kills people for disrespect. Lisa moved forward on trembling legs, barely breathing. She had to fix this. Had to fix this before Fred woke up and saw. Before he understood what Kenneth had done. Her hands shook violently as she reached for the gloves on Fred's arms, trying desperately to remove them without disturbing him. But her fingers were clumsy with terror, and the rubber stuck to his skin slightly. Please don't wake up. Please, God, please don't let him wake up. Kenneth, she hissed, her whisper sharp and terrified. What did you do? What did you do? Kenneth's small voice was confused, worried. Mama, he was cold. I just... Shoo. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Her hands continued their desperate work, trying to remove the gloves millimeter by millimeter. She knew what Fred Shriver was capable of. She'd heard the stories whispered in the neighborhood. The man who'd crossed him and was found in the river. The business owner who'd refused to pay protection money and watched his store burn. The nephew who'd betrayed him and simply vanished. Fred Shriver didn't forgive. He didn't show mercy. And her 8-year-old son had just touched him while he slept. Please God, Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face as she worked. Not my baby. Not after his father. Please, I'll do anything, just not my baby. Take me instead, but not Kenneth. He's just a child. He didn't know. Please. Behind his closed eyelids, Fred heard every word. Every terrified whisper. Every choked prayer. Every sound of a mother willing to die to protect her child from him. He heard the visceral, bone-deep terror in Lisa's voice, and something inside him shattered completely. She thinks I'll kill her son. She thinks I'm the kind of monster who would hurt a child for an act of kindness. The realization hit Fred like a bullet to the chest. She's right. He'd become exactly what he'd sworn he'd never be. He'd become his father, the man who'd beaten him bloody for spilling milk, who'd broken his arm for crying, who'd taught him that love was weakness and trust was stupidity. Fred had built an empire on fear. He'd cultivated his reputation as a monster deliberately, carefully, because monsters didn't get betrayed. They were too terrifying to cross. But lying there, feeling a mother's desperate hands trying to erase evidence of her son's compassion, Fred understood the price of that power. He'd become the thing children had nightmares about. The thing that made mothers pray. It was time to wake up. Not just from this pretend sleep, but from 40 years of being dead inside. Fred's eyes snapped open like a trap springing shut. Who the hell touched me? His voice exploded through the office like a gunshot, deep and thunderous and filled with volcanic fury. The sound seemed to shake the walls, rattle the windows, make the very air vibrate with danger. Lisa screamed a short, sharp sound of pure terror and stumbled backward. Her body moved on instinct, placing herself between Fred and Kenneth. Her arms spread wide, shielding her son, even though she was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "Mr. Shriver, please," her voice broke. "Please, it was an accident. He's just a child. He didn't mean." Fred surged to his feet, the red rubber gloves falling from his arms to the floor. He was a massive man, 6'3" even at 68, broad-shouldered and powerful. His face was contorted with calculated rage, his eyes blazing. But even in his manufactured fury, Fred's gaze flicked to the desk. The money sat exactly where Kenneth had placed it. Every stack accounted for. Every bill protected. Moved away from the edge to safety. Not stolen. Safeguarded. "You." Fred's voice was a low growl as he pointed at Kenneth, who was pressed against the wall behind his mother's trembling form. "You put these gloves on me, boy?" Kenneth's small voice was barely audible. "Why, yes, sir. Come here. Now." "No." Lisa's cry was desperate. "Please, Mr. Shriver, punish me. Fire me. I'll work for free. I'll do anything, but please don't hurt him." "I said now." Kenneth gently touched his mother's arm. His hand was shaking, but his voice was steady in a way that broke Lisa's heart. "It's okay, Mama. I did it. I have to answer." The 8-year-old stepped out from behind his mother's protection and walked forward on legs that threatened to buckle. He stopped a few feet from Fred, his small body rigid with terror, but his chin raised. "You were cold," Kenneth said, his voice trembling but honest. "I saw the goosebumps on your arms. Mama says when old people get cold, they get sick. I didn't want you to get sick." Fred's face twisted with theatrical disgust. "You think I need help from you? Some poor kid from the projects? You think Fred Shriver needs protection from a child? I just wanted to help." "Help." Fred's laugh was harsh, bitter. He picked up one of the red gloves from the floor, holding it like it was contaminated. "You put your filthy cleaning gloves on me. You touched my desk. You moved my property." He gestured to the money, to the cigar cutter. "You touched my things without permission." Fred leaned down, his face close to Kenneth's, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "In my world, boy, touching a man's things without permission is disrespect. And disrespect costs." Lisa sobbed behind them. "Please, God, please." Fred straightened, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression cold and merciless. This was the moment. The real test. Not whether Kenneth would steal, he'd already proven he wouldn't. But what would he offer to save himself? Would his mother throw him under the bus to save her job? Would Kenneth lie, deflect, blame someone else? Fred's voice was ice. "How are you going to pay for this insult, boy? What do you have that could possibly make this right?" He watched Kenneth's face. Watched Lisa's desperate calculations. Watched to see if fear would finally corrupt what compassion had left pure. "Me?" Lisa lurched forward, falling to her knees in front of Fred. "I'll pay. I'll work for free a year, 2 years, however long you want. I'll clean every inch of this house every single day. I'll..." "Quiet." Fred's voice cut through her desperation like a blade. His eyes never left Kenneth. "I didn't ask what you would pay. The boy disrespected me. The boy pays the debt. But he has nothing. He's 8 years old." "Please, Mr. Shriver." "Then he has nothing to give, and we have a problem." Fred's voice was merciless. "What's it going to be, boy? How do you make this right?" Kenneth stood frozen, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, but he didn't cry. He didn't run. He didn't hide behind his mother. Instead, he turned and walked slowly back to the wooden chair where his backpack sat slumped against the wall. Kenneth's hands were shaking so badly he could barely unzip the worn canvas bag. He reached inside and pulled something out, cradling it against his chest for just a moment. Then he turned and walked back to Fred. In his small hands, Kenneth held a pair of boxing gloves. They were red, faded from bright crimson to a deep rust color, and worn at the edges. The leather was cracked in places, but the gloves had been carefully maintained, lovingly preserved. They were far too large for Kenneth's hands. "These were my daddy's," Kenneth said, his voice barely above a whisper. He held the gloves up toward Fred like an offering at an altar. He was training to be a boxer. He was going to be a champion. Everyone in our neighborhood said so. Lisa's sob cut through the air. "Kenneth, no. Baby, no." "He died 3 years ago," Kenneth continued, his words tumbling out now, desperate and honest. "Some men were fighting outside our building. They had knives. Daddy stepped in to stop them because there were kids watching. He saved a little girl, but Kenneth's voice broke. "He got hurt. He didn't make it to the hospital." Tears were streaming down Kenneth's face now, but he kept talking. "Mama gave me these gloves after the funeral. She said as long as I had them, I'd have a piece of Daddy with me. His strength. His courage." Kenneth stepped forward and placed the boxing gloves on Fred's desk, right next to the stacks of protected money. His small hands lingered on the leather for just a moment, then pulled away. "You can have them," Kenneth whispered. "They're all I have that's worth anything. But please, I don't want Mama to be scared anymore. I don't want her to cry. So you can have Daddy's gloves if it makes things okay." Fred stared at the boxing gloves on his desk. His hands, which had held guns without trembling, which had signed death warrants without hesitation, shook as he reached out and picked up the gloves. They were lighter than he expected, worn soft from use and age. Inside one glove, someone had written in faded marker, "Randy Grubbs, future champion." Randy, the boy's father. A man who died protecting strangers. And his son was giving away his only connection to that father to save his mother from a monster. Fred's vision blurred. Suddenly, he saw a different face. His own father's face, twisted with rage and alcohol, fists raised, teaching young Fred that strength meant domination and love was weakness. "This child has more courage than every killer in my organization," Fred's mind screamed. "More honor in 8 years than I've had in 68. The fortress around Fred Shriver's heart didn't just crack. It shattered completely. Fred stood there, the worn boxing gloves trembling in his hands, and for the first time in 40 years, tears burned behind his eyes. "The money." His voice came out broken, barely recognizable. "I wasn't asleep." Lisa's breath caught. Kenneth's eyes widened. Fred set the boxing gloves down with extraordinary care, as if they were made of glass. Then he sank heavily into his chair, suddenly looking every day of his 68 years. "I was awake the whole time," he continued, his voice raw. "The money on the desk, it was bait. A trap. I've been doing this for 40 years, testing people. Housekeepers, bodyguards, business associates. Everyone." He laughed bitterly. "Everyone fails. Everyone steals. Everyone proves that loyalty is a fairy tale and human nature is rotten." Kenneth stood frozen, trying to understand. "I set you up, kid." Fred's hands covered his face. "I pretended to sleep. I put $10,000 right there where you could see it. I waited for you to take it so I could catch you red-handed and prove to myself one more time that everyone betrays. But you didn't take it." Fred's voice cracked. "You covered me with your gloves because I was cold. You moved my money to keep it safe. You protected things that weren't yours." He looked up at Kenneth, his eyes red-rimmed. "I was testing you like you were just another rat looking for cheese. But you're not a rat. You're—" He couldn't finish. Lisa had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. Fred stood abruptly, walked to his desk, and grabbed the stacks of $100 bills. He thrust them toward Lisa with shaking hands. "Take this. All of it. The 10,000. Buy Kenneth everything he needs. Buy yourself safety. Buy," his voice broke again. "Buy your son something better than this. Mr. Shriver, I can't. Take it." The command was fierce, but not angry. Desperate. "Please." Lisa's hands closed around the money, her knees nearly buckling. Fred turned back to Kenneth, who was watching him with wide, confused eyes. The Mafia boss knelt down, this powerful man who never knelt for anyone until he was eye level with the 8-year-old boy. "Kenneth, I want you to come here after school. Every day." Fred's voice was steady now, but quiet. Humble. "I'll pay for a car to pick you up. I'll pay for your school, your books, college when the time comes. Everything." "Why?" Kenneth whispered. Fred picked up the boxing gloves again, held them like they were sacred. "Because I have blood money," Fred said simply. "Mountains of it. But I'm bankrupt where it counts. I have power, but I'm powerless against what I've become. You have nothing," his voice caught. "But you're rich. You have something I lost so long ago I forgot it existed." "What's that?" "Humanity." Fred's tears finally fell. "You have a good heart in a world that tried to make you hard. Your mother raised a warrior, not a criminal." He extended his hand. "In exchange for everything I can give you, I want you to teach me something." Kenneth looked at the offered hand, then back at Fred's face. "Teach you what?" "How to be human again." Kenneth stared at this terrifying man, this monster who'd made his mother pray and beg, and saw something different now. He saw someone broken. Someone lost. Someone who needed help just as much as Kenneth had needed warmth for his mother's shivering hands. Kenneth thought of his father. Of what Randy would do. "Okay," Kenneth said softly. He reached out his small hand and placed it in Fred's massive palm. "Deal." Fred's fingers closed gently around the boy's hand, and he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Hold on, if you're still watching and you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This story gets even more insane. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell because next tomorrow I'm dropping a story about a janitor who overheard a mafia boss secret and had 48 hours to decide whether to destroy him or save him. Comment more if you want that story. Now, back to Kenneth and what he did that made the entire mafia turn on Fred. Kenneth Grubbs stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Shriver Building's conference room, looking out over the city skyline. He was 18 now, tall, broad-shouldered, with his father's athletic build honed by years of the boxing training Fred had insisted on. The sharp charcoal suit he wore fit him perfectly, tailored and expensive, but he wore it with the same quiet humility he'd carried as a child. Behind him, the conference room was filled with people. Fred's biological nephew, Vincent. The former lieutenants, Carlo, Tommy, and Reeves. Associates who'd been with the organization for decades. On the walls where photographs of cash and weapons once hung, there were now pictures of community centers, youth boxing gyms, and scholarship recipients. The transformation had been gradual, taking place over the 10 years since that Sunday morning when an 8-year-old boy had covered a sleeping mafia boss with cleaning gloves. Fred Shriver had died 3 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer. But he hadn't died afraid or alone or filled with regret. He died peacefully in his bed with Lisa holding one hand and Kenneth holding the other, and his last words had been, "Thank you for saving me, kid." Lisa sat in the corner of the room now, dressed in simple black, her eyes red but her spine straight. She ran the Shriver Foundation these days, a nonprofit that funded youth programs in the city's most violent neighborhoods. The organization that once trafficked fear now trafficked hope. Richard Morrison, Fred's longtime attorney, entered the room carrying a leather portfolio. The conversations died immediately. Vincent Shriver leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing at his lips. He'd been waiting for this moment for years. The old man was finally dead, and the empire would return to Blood family where it belonged. Gentlemen. Lisa. Kenneth. Morrison's voice was formal as he sat at the head of the massive table. We're here for the reading of Frederick Shriver's last will and testament. He opened the portfolio and withdrew several documents. To my nephew, Vincent Shriver, I leave a severance payment of $500,000, contingent upon his permanent separation from all Shriver business interests. Vincent's smile froze. What? To my former associates, Carlo DeLuca, Thomas Reeves, and Michael Romano, I leave similar severance packages and my gratitude for your years of service. You are hereby released from all obligations and stripped of all operational authority. The room erupted. This is insane. Vincent surged to his feet. I'm his blood, his only living relative. Morrison continued reading, his voice cutting through the chaos. To Kenneth Randy Grubbs, I leave the entirety of my estate. All business holdings, all properties, all financial assets, and complete operational control of all Shriver interests. The silence that followed was deafening. No. Vincent's face had gone crimson. Absolutely not. This is fraud. That kid isn't blood. He's not family. He's not even one of us. Carlos stood as well, his voice harsh. We've been loyal to Fred for 30 years. We bled for this organization. And he's handing everything to some kid he took pity on. He's 18 years old. Tommy's fist slammed the table. What does he know about running an empire? Kenneth turned slowly from the window. His expression was calm, but there was steel beneath it, the same quiet courage that had made him approach a sleeping monster to offer warmth. You're right, Kenneth said quietly. I'm not blood. And I'm not one of you. He walked to the table and placed both hands on its surface, looking each man in the eye. But that's exactly why Fred chose me. Morrison raised his hand, silencing the protests. There's a letter. Fred requested it be read in full. He withdrew a handwritten document, Fred's distinctive bold script covering several pages. Morrison cleared his throat and began. To my family and my organization, you measure power in fear and blood money. You measure loyalty in bodies buried and territories controlled. By those metrics, I was successful. I was powerful. I was feared. But 10 years ago, I was a dying man, not from disease, but from emptiness. Kenneth's eyes closed, remembering. I set a trap for an 8-year-old boy. I wanted to prove, one final time, that human nature is corrupt. That everyone betrays. That trust is weakness. Instead, that boy saw me shivering and covered me with his gloves to keep me warm. He didn't see a monster. He saw a human being who needed help. Vincent's face had gone pale. The lieutenant sat frozen. He protected my money when he could have stolen it and changed his life. But the real debt was paid when Kenneth gave me his father's boxing gloves, his only inheritance, his only connection to a man he loved, to save his mother from my manufactured rage. He gave me his legacy to protect someone he loved. In that moment, he taught me what strength really means. Not domination, not fear, but sacrifice, courage, love. Lisa was crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. Kenneth gave me 10 years I didn't deserve. He came to this house every day after school. He talked to me, laughed with me, taught me about honor when I'd forgotten the word existed. He gave me purpose. He gave me redemption. So I leave him everything, not because he earned it through violence, but because he earned it through compassion. He is my true heir. Not in blood, but in the only thing that matters, character. Morrison set down the letter and lifted a locked case onto the table. He slid it toward Kenneth. He wanted you to have this. Kenneth's hands trembled as he unlocked the case. Inside, mounted in professional shadow boxes, were 2 pairs of boxing gloves. The first pair, the oversized red cleaning gloves from that Sunday morning. They'd been professionally restored, the rubber somehow preserved, mounted on black velvet with a gold plaque, the warmth that saved a soul. The second pair, his father's original boxing gloves. The faded red leather had been carefully preserved, every crack and worn spot maintained exactly as it had been. The plaque read, Randy Grubbs, Champion. Kenneth Grubbs, Legacy. Kenneth's tears fell freely now. He kept them. All these years, he kept them. He told me, Morrison said quietly, that those gloves reminded him why he was changing everything. Why he was becoming someone different. Kenneth stood, holding the case against his chest. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite the tears. Fred spent 40 years building an empire on fear. He's giving me the chance to turn it into something else. He looked at Vincent, at the lieutenants. The illegal operations end. Today, all of them. The gambling houses, the protection rackets, everything that hurt this city, it's done. You're going to bankrupt us. Carlo protested. No, we're going to rebuild. Kenneth set the case down and pulled out architectural plans from his briefcase. The warehouse district becomes youth centers. The properties we used for illegal activity become community boxing gyms, after-school programs, scholarship funds. He spread the plans across the table. At the top of each blueprint was a logo, a pair of red boxing gloves with the words, Shriver Community Initiative, Building Champions. I'm going to train kids like me, Kenneth continued. Kids who grow up in violence and poverty and think that's all there is. I'm going to teach them boxing, discipline, life skills. I'm going to give them what Fred gave me, a chance. Vincent shook his head in disgust. You're destroying everything he built. No, Kenneth said quietly. I'm building what he wanted to build before the world made him hard. Before fear became his only language. He picked up his father's boxing gloves, held them gently. My father taught me to protect people, even when it costs you everything. He died proving it. Kenneth's voice strengthened. Fred taught me that even monsters can change. That it's never too late for redemption. Together, they taught me the most important lesson. Power should serve, not dominate. He looked around the room. Anyone who wants to be part of building something good, you're welcome to stay. Anyone who just wants the blood money and the fear, there's your severance. Take it and go. Kenneth closed the case with his gloves and walked toward the door. Lisa stood and followed him, pride radiating from her. At the threshold, Kenneth paused and looked back. Fred Shriver died a better man than he lived. That's all any of us can hope for, the chance to be better than we were. The door closed behind them, leaving the old guard sitting in silence among photographs of smiling children in boxing gyms where drug houses once stood. Redemption, it turned out, looked nothing like empire. It looked like a pair of red gloves and a child's courage to show warmth to a monster. And in the end, that changed everything. 5 years after Fred's death, the Shriver Community Initiative operated 17 youth centers across the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. The empire built on fear had been transformed into a network of hope. Kenneth Grubbs, now 23, stood in the boxing ring of the flagship center, a gleaming gym built exactly where Fred's largest drug operation once stood. Around him, 15 teenagers worked the heavy bags, their gloves striking in rhythmic patterns that echoed like heartbeats. Keep your guard up, Randy. Kenneth called to a 14-year-old who'd been kicked out of 3 schools for fighting. The boy was named after Kenneth's father, a coincidence that felt like providence. On the wall behind the ring, mounted in a climate-controlled case, hung 2 pairs of red gloves. The cleaning gloves and the boxing gloves. Beneath them, a plaque read, Kindness doesn't just change hearts, it can change empires. Kenneth had told the story hundreds of times now. To at-risk youth, to community organizations, to anyone who would listen. The story of how a pair of cleaning gloves and a child's courage had dismantled 40 years of violence. Fred Shriver was a monster, Kenneth would say. But an 8-year-old boy saw him shivering and chose compassion over fear. That single act of kindness gave a dying man 10 years of redemption. The kids always asked the same question. Why did you help him? He was dangerous. Kenneth's answer never changed, because everyone deserves warmth. Even the people who seem cold. Especially the people who seem cold. That's when they need it most. Fred Shriver had died a better man than he lived. That was the power of redemption. It was never too late to change. Never too late to choose differently. Kenneth proved something even more important. The next generation didn't have to repeat the sins of the past. The cycle of violence, of fear, of corruption, it could be broken by courage and compassion. The boxing gloves on the wall weren't just a memorial. They were a mission statement. Randy Grubbs's gloves represented protection, a man who died defending innocence. Fred Shriver's cleaning gloves represented transformation, a soul saved by unexpected kindness. Together, they symbolized what the Shriver Community Initiative stood for, using strength to serve, not dominate. Breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them. Choosing warmth over coldness, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. Kenneth finished the training session and gathered the teenagers in a circle. Sweat dripped from their faces, but their eyes were bright, engaged. My father taught me to protect people, Kenneth said, his voice carrying the weight of legacy. Fred taught me that monsters can change. Together, they taught me that power should serve, not destroy. He pointed to the gloves on the wall. When you leave here today, remember this. The bravest thing you can do is show kindness to someone who doesn't deserve it. Because that's exactly when they need it most. Young Randy raised his hand. What if they don't change? What if your kindness doesn't matter? Kenneth smiled sadly. It always matters. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not obviously. But warmth always matters to someone who's been cold for too long. The Shriver Empire was gone. In its place stood something better. A network of second chances, of transformed lives, of children learning that strength meant protecting, not dominating. Lisa still ran the foundation, funding programs that kept kids off the streets Fred once controlled. The money that once bought fear now bought hope. And on the wall of every Shriver Community Center hung the same red gloves, the same message. An 8-year-old boy saw a monster shivering and chose compassion. He changed everything. So can you. Sometimes salvation comes from the smallest hands. Sometimes empires fall to kindness. And sometimes, the warmth of cheap rubber gloves is enough to melt a frozen heart and change the world. If this story moved you and you still haven't subscribed, I don't know what to tell you. I spend 40+ hours researching, writing, and producing these stories for free, and only 7% of you actually subscribe. If you genuinely felt something, if Kenneth's courage or Fred's redemption touched you at all, the least you can do is hit that button. It costs you nothing, but it changes everything for this channel. Drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's given up on people changing, share this video with them. Sometimes the algorithm buries stories that actually matter. Don't let that happen here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see the real ones in the next video.